Winx Club got rebooted, and we all saw how it was received by the fans. Where did it go wrong? And most importantly, what did it do right? I am Vikitor, I am a 3D artist, and I love to talk about Winx and animation. Winx Club originally came out in 2004, and after 8 seasons, fans had started to notice a decrease in quality, especially in the quality of the writing, that, pandering to a younger demographic, included less mature, often shallower themes, and a lack of proper characterization of the main characters, who all started to behave like a hive mind. I'm making videos talking about my thoughts on each seasons. Videos on season 1 and 2 are out if you're interested. So a reboot was a fresh start for the franchise, to go back to its original glory. Leading up to the release of part 1, it was advertised that the reboot would be different from the original, but it would capture that same magic, and some of its deeper, darker topics. While many fans got excited for this when the show came out, flaws started arising pretty quickly. I'm going to dive into part 1, spoilers, and talk about what I thought were its strengths and weaknesses, as well as share my hopes for the imminent part 2, which is apparently out in the UK but I have not seen it yet. The plot. First and foremost, we have to understand the overarching plot. Bloom is the fairy of the dragon flame. Her world, Domino, was taken over by the ancestral witches during a war with the Company of Light, in which her parents, King Oritel and Queen Marian, disappeared, and Daphne, her sister, got killed, or turned into a spirit. If you're watching this video, chances are you knew that story very well from the original show. Where this show switches things up is Damien, Bloom's twin brother, who has half of the dragon flame. After Domino was destroyed, the new villain of the season, Vexius, King Oritel's former right-hand man, kidnapped Damien and raised him as his son. Damien genuinely thinks he's Vexius' biological child. This is the big change of the reboot. The Tricks make a deal with Vexius and they both hunt the dragon flame. Specifically Bloom's, even if Damien also has it, I guess they want the full thing. While the twin plot twist may be easy to figure out early on, and many people compared it to self-insert OCs in fanfiction, which is so fair, I'm open to the change. The original is always there to go back to. I think most fans wanted something fresh that still had that original Winx DNA. Where did it go wrong then? Characters. The Winx Girls. With a new version of the series comes a new version of each character. While the show does try to give each girl her characterization and moment to shine, we generally get less organic character moments than in the original. Stella and Musa in particular bring up their complicated family situations on different occasions. Stella's parents are divorced, and Musa grew up in poverty after her mother passed away. These comments, however, are always just thrown out, kind of in the middle of nowhere, with very little weight to them. In the original Season 1, the episode A Friendship Sundered introduces the magic dimension equivalent of Mother's Day, in which Musa and Stella's family situations naturally come up, giving us a full episode to see how they spend their day, whether it's Musa mourning her loss on one of Alphea's towers, or Stella distracting herself with Bloom and the boys. This depth so far has been lacking in the reboot. The show tells us that the history of the characters, but it fails at showing us how they are impacted meaningfully. Aisha also gets a B-plot in the Dark Bloom episode, in which we see her relationship with her parents and how strict they are. That plot point only gets a couple of scenes, but once again, it never returns in other episodes to flesh out how Aisha's upbringing affects her interactions with others. This contrasts her treatment in Season 2, where her parents being really strict and her growing up alone constantly affected her relationship with the Winx. Flora gets nothing, which is surprising because she actually has more screen time than she originally did, even being the one to find Bloom together with Stella. Instead, the only plot point relevant to her is her crush on Damien, which is actually a lot more about Damien than it is Flora, so I will talk about it later in the video. Bloom's character also gets completely flattened. Her original disappointment when she sees her parents get her a bike instead of a motorbike was replaced by excitement. She never acts impulsively, which she used to do a lot in the original. This is not a simple character change, as the new Bloom ends up feeling passive to the story. I want to make it clear that my comparisons to the original are not because I expect everything to stay the same. I am fine with some elements being different. I just would appreciate the same quality. And on this note, Tekna is actually a great character in the reboot. Definitely the most interesting Winx girl, even if she gets less screen time than some of the others. While Reboot Tekna is very different from the original, the reboot successfully establishes a character flaw. She's socially awkward and extremely shy. She's scared of showing her emotions and or hurting others because of her lack of empathy. Through this first part, we see this flaw intertwined with her personality and sense of humor in a way that makes her compelling and all-rounded. And while I don't expect her to completely change in just 13 episodes, we do see her getting more comfortable with her new friends. First in the bonfire during the camping episode, and later in the simulation room. Talking of which, the simulation room was one of the episodes that I believe was written specifically to work on the cast's character development, and as such, I believe it clearly highlights the flaws in the reboot's writing. The episode has the girls take a test in the simulator room. In this test, they'll have to face their deepest fears. The episode uses the premise to show the audience their fears one by one, in a very rigid way. The concept had merit, seeing a character's fears could be interesting, and even make them realize something more about themselves. In addition, the rest of the class watching could lead to major conflicts and drama. The show committing to showing all 6 Winx, however, diluted the experience. The girls with interesting fears like Tekna, Musa, arguably Stella, and even the Tricks did not get enough time for development. Instead, we saw Flora being scared of a storm hurting the plants and her not being able to protect them. That's just not interesting. It doesn't show us anything new or personal about Flora. To a lesser degree, I think the same of Bloom and Aisha's simulation tests. It's not that the fear wasn't reasonable, but the simulator's setting added nothing interesting to the conflict. If anything, Bloom's fear was to lose control of her powers and hurt her friends. But if the simulator forced her to lose control so that she could face her fear, then how's she supposed to deal with that? It wouldn't have happened in real life. I don't think it made a lot of sense, and I mourn what we could have had, especially had they given each of the Tricks enough time to shine. The specialists. I don't have much to say about them. In a way, they somewhat lack development in the original too, which made the reboot version of them feel less jarring. If we don't consider the CG models, at least. Brendan actually gets a cute moment with Bloom, yes, Bloom, as they try to save Stella from the Trix's trap. That was very cute. If this is one big friend group, it's nice to see dynamics between Winx and specialists that aren't dating. Riven is really sweet, which is fine. Once again, I'm happy to see change as long as properly executed. The dynamic between him and Musa is very well explored in the episode about Musa's first concert. The only thing I found odd is that Musa treats him as if he were the old, toxic Riven, when he didn't do anything wrong in the reboot. This felt weird and actually made Musa look a bit like a jerk. The episode does resolve the conflict though, even if one-sided, so it wasn't all that bad. I'm not even too mad nothing happens with Darcy, because I feel like that this Riven would not fall for her tricks. I do wonder though why they brought up Darcy's crush in like 30 seconds just to forget about it. Finally, I do want to talk about the Sky Bloom Diaspora love triangle, which one may call a love triangle of missed potential. In the original show, the conflict between Bloom and Diaspora was explosive, and a catalyst for more events in the season. But it was limited in its scope by the fact that Diaspora did not live on the same planet as Bloom and Sky. She was just there for one day. Now, on the other hand, they all go to the same school. Well, Sky goes to Red Fountain, but he takes classes at Alfea. Close enough. There is so much they could have done with that. As a fan of romance and telenovelas, and yes, Winx always had a telenovela flair to it, I can imagine a slow burn between Bloom and Sky, or a big mistake that immediately shifts the dynamics between the characters. Anything, please do anything interesting. But no. The show refuses to have the main character make any mistakes, so nothing happens. Diaspora gets villainized for little to no reason. I literally can't even put into words how annoyed I am. at Dark Bloom crossing the aspirin sky in the hallway and just making fun of them. That would have been a great moment to flirt with Sky, maybe even kiss him in front of the Aspro. It would have added a level of complexity to Dark Bloom, where it's not just evil Bloom, but also a less inhibited version of her. The impact of a kiss would lead to both Bloom and Sky having doubts, wondering whether it was real or not. Like, if you're not going to let your main character be messy in its regular form, at least use this opportunity. Why can't Dark Bloom kiss Sky when she can kill Musa? The villains. If you're wondering what I'm drawing, I really didn't feel like drawing a character from the Winx reboot, so instead, I'm sharing one of my original characters, Alba. I had initially used her to run some tests in Unreal Engine, which you can also check out on the channel. The villains. I don't have much to say here, the tricks are always iconic, and even the redesigns and 3D models ate. I'm always in awe when Stormy's on screen. Her 3D model is genuinely gorgeous. Unfortunately, we still know very little about them other than they're just evil. The show did hint at a few plot points, however, that I really hope they explore. The tricks secretly being insecure in the simulation room. I would love to see them being humanized a little. And especially them being sort of adopted by Griffin. This also justifies them breaking the rules constantly and facing very little consequences. I'm not blaming the reboot here. I'm genuinely interested and hope to see more. As for Vexius, he is a bit less interesting. I would compare him to Valtor, but that is an insult to Valtor. Other than a personal connection to Bloom and Damien's parents, Vexius has very little going on for him. The fact that he has tried to get the Dragon Flame from Bloom himself multiple times without succeeding makes me feel like he's a bit of a joke also. This is where we get into the next issue with these villains and the show as a whole, the pacing. Most of the episodes are just the villains trying to get Bloom's flame and failing, with little consequences to the rest of the season. If you missed half of the episodes, chances are you still would not realize, unless they were the first episode or the mid-season finale. The reboot in general is paced so poorly. It's almost fascinating how it can drag while also introducing and wrapping up plot arcs within 2 minutes. The first 2 episodes of the original show happen within 5 minutes in the reboot, leaving the rest of the episode to a pretty underwhelming conflict between the Winx and the Tricks, in which the witches want Bloom, who had just arrived by the way, to leave Althea because Icy feels bad vibes. If you want to skip introduction, do that. You can start a story in medias res, meaning in the middle of the story. But as it's paced now, it's impossible to keep track of, because characters get introduced so quickly. And honestly, most of the episode is kind of boring. I'm much more interested in seeing how Bloom's parents react to her going off on boarding school with Stella than I am watching the Winx catch fluffy animals around the woods and Gardenia. Episode 2 of the reboot follows the plot of episode 17 of the original show, in which Bloom runs away from Althea because the Tricks tricked her into believing she's a witch, just to get ambushed by them as they try to steal her dragon flame. Bloom, however, had just gotten to Althea, just met the Winx. The episode simply does not hit. When they played a sad montage of the Winx girls together as Bloom was leaving the school, I genuinely started laughing because they don't know each other. We as the audience don't even know them. On top of that, the Winx and Vexius immediately realize Bloom has the dragon flame. So a lot of the lower stake moments that were present in season 1, allowing us to get familiar with the characters and the world, just don't have as much time to breathe, leading to constant repetitive conflicts between the villains and Bloom. By the end of this part 1, the stakes are supposed to get a lot higher, as one of the professors from Red Fountain, whom we had just met, gets sent to the Omega Dimension by Vexius. The school for specialists gets destroyed, and the Winx face Vexius and Damien. I fear this constant fear of letting the characters breathe comes from wanting to make the tone of the cartoon darker, like fans had requested, to be honest. But it ends up being dark for the sake of being dark, lacking the depth that fans missed from the original. Overall, with a few exceptions here and there, the writing ends up being pretty dull despite how fast the pacing is, and it truly is a shame. Damien. I wanted to talk about Damien last before wrapping up my discussion on the writing of the show. He is now the co-protagonist with Bloom, and as such, his addition is felt a lot and shifts the tone of the reboot. The fans definitely felt this, and from what I've seen from discourse online, this addition was not very well appreciated. I don't actually dislike him. As a matter of fact, I think he was one of the few characters that are written well in the reboot. I believe that does come from the fact that he's the new character and therefore actually needed an introduction, unlike the six main girls where the writers might have felt they could rely on prior knowledge. Damien is a character most similar to old Riven in his struggle to choose between light and darkness, partially because of Vexius manipulation. While he has superficial friendships with the Winx, his romantic interest in Flora is what tends to push him toward the light. This is what I meant when earlier in the video I hinted at the fact that while Flora is very meaningful for Damien's character arc, the opposite is not as true. Damien's arc is not over yet, we have yet to see the rest of the season, but so far he has at least had a clear characterization, and quite an interesting premise and struggle. Why do people dislike him? Part of it is that he's taking a lot of screen time, when most Winx are starving for development. Though I will be honest and say that I think that even without Damien, the Winx would not be getting proper development. We've been seeing this for years in this franchise. It seems like a lack of competence or effort on the writing side rather than an actual need for more screen time. I could think of a ton of moments in the reboot that could easily be cut or rewritten to better show the Winx as fully rounded characters. On the other hand, having Damien as a co-protagonist has an impact on the overall feel of the show, which once revolved around a full female cast, making the show less feminine in the process. Having a male character in the core group doesn't have to remove its femininity, but when he is the co-protagonist, that is a real risk. And I don't think Damien does anything to help. I understand the fans' concerns in this regard. He probably was not necessary. And actually, there is a lot to say about this topic, and I would love to give it its own video. Art style and music. I like to mostly focus on writing in my videos, but I do want to touch on the art style and music briefly. I myself am actually a 3D artist and I love 3D animation. The character designs, however, are a bit hit or miss. As I mentioned, I often find myself in awe of the Trix's design, and some of the Winx are no different. I find Bloom and Flora's 3D models and hair grooms are particularly beautiful. There is a huge discrepancy in both art style and model quality, however, with many of the secondary characters, like Diaspro and the Specialists, looking inconsistent. The character animation, so the movement, is also often very stiff. The transformation sequences are gorgeous and were animated by a different studio compared to the rest of the show. I'm sure they were more expensive, but I can't help but wonder how the show would have looked like had that studio taken over production for the episodes as well. When it comes to music, I'm actually pretty happy. Winx Forever is an earworm, and embarrassingly, my most listened to song in 2025. Overall, the vocal album keeps up the quality well, with songs like Going Home, Step Into the Dark, Superpower, and Like a Butterfly. I did notice, however, that the score seems to be one of those invisible scores that only outline certain feelings rather than establishing any type of musical theme. This can be common and is not inherently a problem, but I can't help but miss a lot of those original themes, such as the Althea theme and the Daphne theme. Hopes for the future. In conclusion, the Winx reboot tries to renovate the franchise while keeping its original character depth, but has mixed results. As we will soon be watching part 2, my hopes are that it leaves space to actually develop the Winx girls in a more organic way. I would love to see the Trix get more humanized and have motives behind just being evil and powerful. Finally, I do hope we see more of Damien befriending the Winx and hopefully becoming a fairy. I do think and hope that his initial disappointment, as he was pronounced the warlock will result in him eventually choosing good and becoming the first male fairy we see transform in Winx Club. Fingers crossed. With that being said, I'm Vikitor, a 3D animator that loves to talk about Winx and animation. Please subscribe if you're interested, and bye bye.